Modern History. 22. 2022. Q1. Why did the armies of the British East India Company, mostly comprising of Indian soldiers, win consistently against the more numerous and better equipped armies of the Indian rulers? Give reasons. 150 words, 10 marks. Answer. Approach. Filled circle introduction. Introduce the British East India Company and the paradox of Indian soldiers fighting against their own rulers. Filled circle body. Discuss reasons for the company's consistent victories over Indian armies, including their superior military tactics, advanced weaponry, and ability to exploit divisions among Indian rulers. Provide examples of significant battles, such as the Battle of Plassey, to illustrate the British East India Company's superiority. Filled circle conclusion. Summarize the main points and conclude with the ultimate outcome of British conquest in India. Introduction. The British East India Company's conquest of India involved Indian soldiers fighting against their own rulers. Despite being outnumbered and less equipped, the company's armies consistently emerged victorious in battles across the subcontinent. Body. The British East India Company's, EIC, consistent victories against the larger armies of Indian rulers can be attributed to several key factors. Filled circle military strategy and organization. EIC's armies adopted modern military tactics and effectively used combined arms, while Indian armies were less organized and hadn't adopted modern techniques. For instance, in the Battle of Plassey, EIC troops and allies defeated a larger Indian army through superior tactics and organization. Filled circle diplomacy and espionage. EIC used diplomacy and espionage to create divisions and mistrust among Indian rulers, weakening their opposition. During the Battle of Plassey, the British conspired with a high-ranking officer in Siraj-ud-Daulas army, ensuring his non-cooperation during the battle. Filled circle control of maritime trade and resources. EIC's dominance in maritime trade allowed them to control vital resources, such as money, weapons, and supplies, which they used to finance and equip their armies. Filled circle political fragmentation and lack of unity. Indian states were politically fragmented and engaged in rivalries, making it easier for the British to use a divide and rule strategy. During the Anglo-Mysore Wars, the EIC formed alliances with the Marathas and the Nizam of Hyderabad to counter the ambitions of Tipu Sultan and his father. Filled circle gradual expansion. The British followed a policy of gradual expansion, which allowed them to consolidate the gains before moving on to new conquests. This approach enabled them to build a strong foundation and avoid overextending their resources. Filled circle technological advantage. EIC had a technological advantage, using advanced weaponry such as flintlock muskets and field artillery. Indian armies often relied on outdated equipment, which disadvantaged them in battles. This was evident in the Battle of Wandawash. Filled circle role of Indian mercenaries. EIC made extensive use of Indian mercenaries and soldiers, who were often more loyal to their paymasters than to their native rulers. These Indian soldiers formed the bulk of the EIC's forces, providing them with a significant manpower advantage. Conclusion. Indian rulers' failure to modernize their armies and adapt to new military technologies and strategies put them at a disadvantage against the well-organized and disciplined EIC forces. The British exploited this edge, along with diplomatic skills and political fragmentation, to secure multiple victories and colonize India for nearly 2 centuries. 23. Q2. Why was there a sudden spurt in famines in colonial India since the mid-18th century? Give reasons. 150 words, 10 marks. Answer. Approach. Filled circle introduction. Start by providing a brief background on the occurrence of famines in colonial India since the mid-18th century. Highlight the severity of the situation and its impact on the Indian population. Filled circle body. Identify and mention the possible reasons behind it. Discuss how British colonial policies, such as land revenue and taxation, played a significant role in the occurrence of famines. Discuss how British colonial policies and the spread of commercial agriculture led to the neglect of subsistence agriculture. Filled circle conclusion. Sum up by mentioning the long-lasting impact of famines on the Indian population and the need to acknowledge and address the issue. Introduction. The arrival of the British colonial era in India from the mid-18th century had profound impacts on the country's social and economic fabric. One of the most disastrous consequences of this period was the sudden and devastating increase in famines, which inflicted widespread starvation and loss of life on the Indian population. The sudden spurt in famines in colonial India can be attributed to several factors, which were primarily a result of British colonial policies and their impact on the Indian economy and society. Filled circle agricultural policies, British land revenue policies, such as the permanent settlement of 1793 in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, placed a heavy tax burden on farmers, leaving them with little incentive or resources to invest in agricultural improvements. The ryotwary system, implemented in Madras, Bombay, and parts of Assam, also led to high land revenue demands and further stressed the farmers. Filled circle cash crops and commercialization. British colonial policies encouraged the cultivation of cash crops, such as indigo, cotton, and opium, which led to a decline in food crop cultivation and made the Indian population more susceptible to food shortages and famines. Filled circle infrastructure and irrigation. The British built extensive railway networks in India, but the construction of irrigation canals and other agricultural infrastructure was comparatively limited, resulting in increased vulnerability to famines. Filled circle economic exploitation. The British extracted resources from India through heavy taxation and trade imbalances, which depleted India's wealth and left the population with fewer resources to deal with famines. The drain of wealth theory by Dadabhai Naoroji highlights this exploitation. Filled circle inadequate famine relief measures. The colonial government's response to famines was often slow and inadequate. For instance, during the Orissa famine of 1866, the colonial government's relief measures were criticized due to prioritizing law and order over relief. Filled circle ecological factors. Deforestation for agriculture and resources extraction worsened droughts and increased vulnerability to famines. For example, deforestation in the central provinces and Berar caused ecological imbalances and more frequent droughts. Conclusion. The famines had long-lasting impacts on the Indian population, leading to a loss of lives, displacement, and economic stagnation. It is crucial to acknowledge and address the issue by implementing policies that promote sustainable agriculture and provide adequate support to vulnerable communities in times of crisis. Simply put, the devastating famines in colonial India highlight the negative impact of British rule and the need for fair policies and resource management.